Good evening. You're watching India Today television. We're getting you up to speed with all the details of the Prime Minister's all-important visit to the United States of America. I'm Sneha Mordani. Let's give you a sense of what's going on right now. This is Prime Minister Modi's first visit to the U.S., remember, since he took oath for the third consecutive time. Soon after landing, he met with members of the diaspora outside the Philadelphia airport and signed a few autographs as well. Later today, he will be holding talks with U.S. President Joe Biden and will also attend the annual Quad Summit in Delaware. Prime Minister Modi is also scheduled to hold separate bilateral meetings with other Quad leaders where discussions will be focusing on defense, technology collaboration and strategies to address ongoing global conflicts, including the situations in Ukraine and Gaza.
I don't think there is any other politician like him who has given his life and has made India up on this stage, made sure that India is respected and loved and he's brought it to the forefront of the world, and I'm so blessed to be with him, to welcome him to Delaware.
Modi ji is great. He has brought golden age of India back in front of us, and this is a historical moment for us to cherish.
ये किताब की पूरी रिसर्च शिकागो में की थी मेरे दोस्त ने, ये संजीव कुमार जी हैं, और उन्होंने ये किताब बहुत ही डिटेल्ड किताब निकाली है ऑन द गुप्ता एम्पायर. मोदी जी ने ये 2018 में लॉन्च करी थी. ये सेकंड एडिशन वो आज साइन करके गए हैं, तो ये उनके सिग्नेचर हमने लिए. एंड वी आर सो प्राउड बिकॉज दिस ब्रिंग्स आउट द हिस्ट्री ऑफ द चंद्रगुप्त एंड द एंटायर एम्पायर ऑफ द गुप्ता, सो द गोल्डन एज ऑफ इंडिया.
मोदी का हार्दिक स्वागत करने के लिए यहाँ पे उपस्थित रहे हैं और मोदी जी ने सबको बहुत ही रिस्पेक्टफुली हाथ मिला के बहुत ही अभिवादन दिया. उसके लिए हम उनके धन्यवाद प्राप्त करते हैं.
All right, members of the diaspora all excited to welcome the Prime Minister. Some of them have already met with the Prime Minister. Rohit is with us from Delaware, getting us up to speed with those details. Rohit, in just some time from now, the Prime Minister is going to be having an all-important bilateral with U.S. President Joe Biden. Give us a sense of what really is going on right now as we speak, and in how much time from now does that meeting start?
Well, so we are standing right outside the president's residence, and I'll try to turn my camera and show you exactly where we are. This is Joe Biden's private residence. I mean, we are stationed just right outside of the residence here, and the meeting is supposed to be started anytime now. We've given it a start time of 1 o'clock, and it looks like there's been some delay. I just got an email from the press office of the White House reading out the meeting of President Biden and that of the Prime Minister. Prime things discussed in this meeting, as we've been stating since this morning. They will talk about China, they will talk about Russia, they'll talk about the war, they will talk about India-US relationship, they will talk about cooperation in semiconductors. There will be so many things that we'll discuss in this meeting. This is a one-hour meeting between President Joe Biden and between Prime Minister Modi and President Joe Biden. And look, the importance of the meeting cannot be understated. This is President Joe Biden inviting Prime Minister Modi at his house. This is very as personal as it gets. This is the final bilateral meeting the leaders will have, and it is President Joe Biden making sure he sticks to what he had said when he took over the presidency. Remember, he said when he took over the presidency, he said this is the most consequential relationship between of this century, that is between India and the US. So very important deliverables coming out of this meeting. We'll probably have a media release around 6 p.m. Eastern. But as I said, very important meeting. Prime Minister Modi has been elected for the third time. I think one of the most important things that could happen today is the Quad meeting, where China and Russia will be also discussed as per Jake Sullivan. So important meetings, and it will start in a while from now.
All right, important meeting, and it's going to start in just some time from now. Any time now is what Rohit is telling us, even as all eyes on the bilateral. The Prime Minister, remember, is in the U.S. for the Quad Summit, the 4th Quad Summit. And Geeta Mohan, a Foreign Affairs editor, is with us for more on that. Geeta, give us a sense of what is going to be discussed threadbare as far as the Quad Summit, the meeting of the 4 countries are concerned.
Well, there are a few very important aspects of any Quad meeting, and the fact that there is always a reiteration, Sneha, that this is not a military bloc, which is what Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, also reiterated when he said that it is not a military bloc. It's not a bloc that is counter China or an anti-China bloc. This certainly is a bloc to secure the Indo-Pacific, focus on the Indo-Pacific, and see how the Indo-Pacific can collaborate, cooperate, and move forward on various fronts. What are the areas that you asked? We're looking at the Indo-Pacific architecture. Strengthening the Indo-Pacific architecture is the foremost agenda of the Quad when it comes to not just security, but freedom of navigation in particular. Then there is, in terms of trade and cooperation, this certainly is, there's a major economic aspect to this entire grouping, and the focus is resilient supply chain. So that's another area that they have been discussing, how to become the four countries, how they can become key to creating a resilient supply chain. And this conversation became all the more important after the world suffered huge disruptions during COVID and were absolutely dependent on China. So that is another aspect. And like you, Sneha, earlier were talking about the fact that there is a major aspect of technology, digital cooperation, artificial intelligence, and countering cyber security threats. That's cyber warfare. So these are areas that certainly are going to be discussed, talked, and there is going to be an outcome document, a joint communique at the conclusion of the summit level meeting, which will not only specify all these areas, but also we've been reiterating this again and again, that this is the last summit that President Biden would be hosting or participating, because he is on his way out. And so this is a legacy item for him. The summit level meetings began under his presidency, and they'd like to show deliverables this time.
All right. Be with us, Geeta. I'll just come back to you in a moment from now, also to Rohit. Just giving our viewers a sense of the agenda of the Quad meeting that Geeta detailed upon as well. Global conflicts, understandably, will be figuring in the discussions, including the situation in Ukraine and Gaza. That's certainly on the agenda. Regional security and cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region. Defense and technology collaborations. Announcements of new initiatives to prevent, detect and treat cancer, which is the Cancer Moonshot initiative that is going to be discussed at the Quad Summit. Rohit continues to be with us. Rohit, as far as Delaware is concerned, the Prime Minister is going to be wrapping up the visit today and then also be moving to New York, where he's got an engagement with the diaspora. That event is there, and then he is going to be also a part of the UNGA, a meeting at the UNGA, which the Prime Minister is also set to address, isn't it?
Yes, he will be meeting with the president, and then there's a Quad summit that we've talked about. Then tonight he goes to New York. Tomorrow there's a diaspora event. On Monday is when he addresses the summit for future. Again, very important. You know, there will be a very important outcomes from these meetings today, and I think some of those will play. You know, when he talks at the UN, and also tomorrow the diaspora event. You know, so a lot of these things and these meetings and deliverables that will be discussed today would be talked about by the Prime Minister tomorrow, and also on Monday when he addresses the UN. Look, and he also has a lot of bilateral meetings set up at UN. We know he's meeting with the Nepalese Prime Minister, from the Vietnamese Prime Minister, and there are other big names also that he would actually end up meeting while he is at the UN. So very important meetings lined up for Prime Minister about this visit, although this is a very short one at that, but it's jam-packed with a lot of meetings, a lot of stuff that will happen, and off the record. I mean, some people are not yet confirming that he could end up meeting with the presidential candidate. So that's not off the table yet, but it could very well happen tomorrow. So this is going to be a very interesting, visit by the Prime Minister.
Well, absolutely. Geeta, the Prime Minister has already tweeted, and there's a second tweet that has come in of the Prime Minister talking about the fact, essentially, that the meetings with the diaspora are always cherished. He's spoken about these meetings in the past as well. They've always, in fact, been the highlight of these events, and he's taken part in outside of India. This also speaks volumes to the kind of importance that the Prime Minister and this government attaches to the sentiments of the diaspora and the role they play in sending out the message of India or in many ways, playing the role of the ambassadors of India as outside of India, isn't it?
Well, absolutely.
Yes.
Look at the visuals, Neha. It never ever tires the Indian diaspora down in an event such as this, where they're meeting Prime Minister Modi. Many of them have met the Prime Minister in the past as well. But this has become a very important part of the Indian administration's soft power policy toolkit. That a strengthened Indian diaspora strengthens bilateral relations between two countries, between India and whichever country that Prime Minister Modi is visiting. And that's certainly something that that plays to India's strength, which is what we're seeing over here also. And again, interestingly, Sneha, it is coming at a time when the United States of America is going into elections. Indian community, a very, very strong community over there. And therefore, the big meetings that could take place on the sidelines of the summit for the future, that is going to be very critical. The Indian side wanted both the presidential candidates, meetings with both the presidential candidates, and it's this diaspora that will impact certain states in terms of the voting, and translating those votes into wins of the states for the Democrats or the Republicans. The Indian side wants to meet both the leaders. Donald Trump himself went ahead and announced the meeting, so one was wondering whether if there
be
could
with
only be
us.
a Trump.
In fact, I'm just going to go straight across to Rohit. Let's just get a sense of what's happening on the ground. Yes, Rohit.
We just saw the Prime Minister's car pull into the private residence of Joe Biden. He just pulled in. Now is when the leaders will meet. We'll probably see visuals coming in from the inside. But Prime Minister actually just went inside Biden's residence. They would be discussing topics that we've been talked about. We've now asked to move from here. I think that they're taking us to a different location. But Prime Minister is right now at the Biden residence meeting with President Joe Biden.
Meeting has just begun, or probably beginning in just a few seconds from now. But we're staying with these pictures right now coming in from the Prime Minister's, from the President's private residence.
Sir, are we moving?
Okay, Rohit continues to be with us. Rohit, we have the pictures right now of the Prime Minister's entourage there arriving at the private residence of President Joe Biden.
Yeah, he just entered, Sneha. As you're probably seeing from the visual, he just got in here. And I think we've been asked to probably move to a different location so we can see them talk and shake hands. So I'll probably move to cover that while you speak to Geeta.
All right, yes, sure. Rohit, I will. In fact, these are pictures from earlier today with the Prime Minister interacting with the members of the diaspora. But we are going to be putting out those pictures of the Prime Minister arriving at President Joe Biden's private residence. Geeta, also, in fact, Geeta continues to be with us. You know, Geeta, there are several... Okay. Right, the Prime Ministers, we'll be getting in more details in just a second from now, but the meetings would have just begun. In fact, it's set to begin with President Joe Biden. Let's give you a sense of the significance of this visit. It underscores undoubtedly strengthening of India-US bond, the highlights of which are going to be technology, trade and defense collaboration. Also promoting technology collaboration, especially in the area of artificial intelligence and cyber security. Also, it highlights India-UC space collaboration, promotes the joint efforts in combating climate change. Also, the focus on geopolitical interests, especially the Indo-Pacific region. And lastly, and importantly though, engagement with the Indian diaspora. The Desi factor still very much a very, very important factor, Geeta, even as we're staying with the pictures of the Prime Minister interacting with the members of the diaspora there. 4.5 million Indian Americans in the US. He is in Delaware, but a small group, I would say, is meeting with the Prime Minister, but the big event is scheduled when he moves to New York, isn't it?
Well, before we move into that conversation, that's news just coming in. That's breaking news, Sneha. President Biden and Prime Minister Modi's bilateral meeting has just begun. That's the big news that's coming in. Bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden has just begun. So the bilateral meeting starts first, and then they're going to move into the Quad Summit level meeting. So that's news just coming in, and the bilateral meeting will focus on various aspects of the bilateral relationship, as also regional and global conversations, which will include Russia-Ukraine war. President Biden is going to get a briefing on, will be briefed by Prime Minister Modi, according to Jake Sullivan, on his visits to Ukraine, meetings with Zelensky, meeting with Putin. That's one aspect. There is going to be conversation on Israel-Hamas situation, and the United States of America, again, according to Sullivan, expects India to take a position when it comes to Russia. And there is also going to be a lot of conversation on cooperation on the trade front, defense, technology transfer. There is one niggling issue, that's the summons that we saw recently on the Gurpatwant Singh murder for hire charges against India. An update on whether if there is any forward movement on the high-level inquiry committee that was set up by the Indian side. A very important issue that we broke not so long ago was that India-China border situation will also come up during conversations. The National Security Advisor of US said that Chinese actions in the region, which also includes the border situation between India and China, are also part of the conversations that could take place between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi. So that's news just coming in. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Biden's bilateral meeting has just begun.
All right. These are pictures, in fact, from Prime Minister's meeting with the US President Joe Biden. We'll be getting in more details on that in just a few seconds from now. But these are visuals from a few moments ago, the very moment when Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in fact, reached the private residence of President Joe Biden in Delaware. These are visuals of the Indian Prime Minister's entourage there, which just, in fact, a few moments ago, like I said, just has entered the private residence of President Joe Biden. Let's take a look at these picturs. And even as we stay with those details, what is expected next is the Quad Summit, the meeting between four countries. Geeta, we've been talking about what could be the possible deliverables there. Just give us a sense of what are the kind of discussions also expected at the Quad. And I understand that there are a series of meetings with CEOs of companies as well. What more details can you give us about that as far as businesses here are concerned, and the Prime Minister meeting CEOs of top businesses?
Well, look at the place where Prime Minister Modi has just entered. The gates that Prime Minister Modi has just entered. This is the home of President Biden. So they have personalized this entire visit. They've made it personal. They've made it very a closed group affair of these four important leaders from across the world coming together under one roof, under Biden's roof, to have conversations that have and would have deep impact and deep global implications. So it's very interesting that they chose Delaware, and they chose President Biden's residence as the venue for the Quad Summit, which is going to be a legacy for President Biden. Having said that, the Quad Summit will begin in some time from now. And like we said, defense technology collaborations, digital security, cyber security, global supply chain, resilience in the global supply chains as a counter to what one suffered because of China and the disruptions during COVID. The economic framework when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, how to strengthen that, and global supply chains come within that framework itself. Indo-Pacific security architecture, expansion of maritime cooperation is something that that all four countries are going to look at. But at this point in time, Sneha, what is of great importance is the fact that a final meeting, official meeting between President Biden and Prime Minister Modi is underway as we speak. Prime Minister Modi is meeting President Biden for the bilateral conversations, which means that it's a restricted dialogue followed by a delegation level meeting between the two sides, and they are going to look at the entire ambit of the relationship between the two countries. There are various aspects that will be discussed, but again, Are there deliverables this time around? There will certainly be a statement on how they're moving forward. But consider this a review meeting of what has been and what can be achieved between the two countries, given that this certainly is almost now a lame duck presidency of President Biden. So do not expect major policy announcements. There certainly could be deals or things moving forward, of which conversations have been taking place for a while.
Well, absolutely. Rohit Sharma back with us for more on that. Rohit, as far as the bilaterals are concerned, we have a sense of how there could be, and there are obviously some sticky points, some sticky issues. Give us a sense of what these essentially are and how are they going to be taken up in this meeting. Geeta has been telling us that largely this is going to be a stock-taking kind of an exercise, a review of what was done in the past, and moving forward, how can things get smoother?
Well, look, it is kind of that. I think, as we said before, it's kind of a thank you from both the leaders. But also, you've got to look at the fact that finally we have something called as the Quad Caucus, which was announced yesterday by the White House. It ensures that there's continuity. Whoever wins the White House, there would be support for Quad going forward. I think that's Biden's one of the big deliverables, that they were able to get it done. It's not easy to get things done over on the Capitol Hill, but to make sure that there's a Quad caucus that would vouch for Quad, regardless of whoever is in charge in the White House. I think it speaks volumes about what Biden has been able to achieve. As far as some of the sticking points goes, I mean, look, Russia, the US obviously wants Russia to be brought up, to be discussed. It thinks India has the power to be able to convince Russia to stop this war. We will see. We'll have to wait and watch and see what happens and what becomes of that. But long story short, I think that's one of the things that will be discussed. There is obviously, this report that came out this morning about some of the people from the Khalistani people meeting with the White House. That I'm not sure if that'll be discussed or not. But White House did acknowledge that there was a meeting that took place. They've expressed concerns about democracy in the past. We will have to wait and watch if that was discussed or not. So these have been some of the points that we usually see coming out of some of these meetings. But at the end of the day, I think the relationship is robust. It has been on an upward trajectory since the last 10, 12, 14 years. And that's what we'll see. And look, one of the few things that both Republicans and Democrats agree on is a strong relationship with India. And I think that is what we'll continue to see, regardless of whoever wins the White House in November. So Joe Biden, from his perspective, as Geeta said, there might not be a big policy decision, but there could be things in the joint statement, that could probably be like, there could be funding announced, there could be joint efforts announced. And again, those would have backing of both the parties, regardless of whoever is in power at the White House. And I think that is what we have to look for. Apart from that, there isn't much, that hasn't been already touched upon. Supply chain, semiconductors, we talked about that. We talked about global security, very important thing. And look, one of the things that I really want to talk about today is the relationship in itself. US has had a very great relationship with UK and Australia, and I think the US is elevating India to that point where you never see, there's a change in power that the US position with UK or Australia changes. I think India is getting to that point where, regardless of whatever political wins we have here this fall, India's relationship would be prioritized by both the parties, and I think that would be something that an assurance probably given to India. And also the fact that Prime Minister Modi himself has said it on the record that India's got friends across political spectrum in the US. So we'll have to wait and watch. But again, as Geeta pointed out, might not be big policy changes, but definitely something that would outlast at least a couple of years of whoever is in charge, at least the next 4 or 5 years.
Absolutely. And what's going to be also important in this meeting, Geeta, is the fact that India is obviously going to be briefing the US. The Prime Minister will be telling President Joe Biden himself about the situation vis-a-vis India-China relationship and about China, about what really is happening in the region, isn't it? That is extremely significant and that is expected.
Well, absolutely. That's certainly going to be one very important aspect of the conversations that are taking place right now as we speak between Prime Minister Modi and President Biden. A lot of conversation if India is going to become peace broker. If you ask me, Sneha, right now, even being a messenger, knowing exactly what Russia is thinking and what Ukraine is thinking in itself is a huge advantage that India has over all those countries who've taken sides, who are either with Ukraine or stand with Russia. They do not know what the other country is thinking in terms of exactly what's happening inside the country in terms of policy decisions. Over here, Prime Minister Modi has the advantage of having spoken to both the leaders. And yes, President Biden will be hearing from Prime Minister Modi as to what is it that the Russian side is thinking, wants, knows, and exactly what was discussed with Zelensky when it comes to how to move forward. At the end of the day, a country like India at this juncture can play a very important role when it comes to bringing the two sides to the negotiating table. But the two sides have to really decide on coming to the negotiating table, and that certainly does not look like a situation that both countries have arrived at to really have a conversation towards peace. Right now, they're looking at a war plan and a victory plan on how to move forward, which will lead to peace.
Geeta, be with us. I'll just come back to you in a moment from now as we continue to get our viewers more details of that bilateral between Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and US President Joe Biden, which is currently underway.